Welcome to SEC Football Live, of course, here on the 440 Sports Network, brought to you by ML Rose, 6 great locations across Middle Tennessee. Geoff Ketchum from orangebloods.com joining us here. My name is Braden Gall. And, Jeff, if you're in Nashville and you want a great beer, a local beer, and a great burger, and the best ranch dipping sauce, according to my wife, in the city of Nashville, you got to go to ML Rose, 6 great locations. How are you, sir?
I'm good yet, man. Hello. Anytime I can get to Nashville for any reason. Now I've got a reason. Let's go get a hamburger.
Well, and after a close game against Vanderbilt, you're going to need a couple beers. So that's how this works. No, one of the few teams to come into Nashville and win a game like that. So I want to ask first and foremost about the health of this team with Texas going to all the way to play Arizona State in Atlanta. Tickets are very cheap for this game, but I want to know how healthy is this team right now relative to the offensive line, the receiving core. We saw some injuries last week. Where are they at?
I think the big injury still continues to be Isaiah Bond when he has not been right since the Oklahoma game in early October. They thought he was on the way back. He's had a high ankle sprain. It's been re-aggravated a couple of times. They sat him for the Clemson game. They may very well sit him for the Arizona State game, hoping that, if they can get to a national semifinal or beyond that they have the player that really stirs the drink for them on offense back when he's not there. It's like playing with a cap gun as opposed to the full artillery that they had before. And they just haven't been the same offense since he's been gone. That coincides with Quinn Ewers' return from the oblique injury, but he's had the ankle injury on top of the oblique injury. Both have been an issue. The oblique has come back and gone away, and it's been good, and then it's gotten worse. And we think Quinn Ewers is going to be okay. He'll probably be as healthy as he's been since September. They'll be okay, I think, everywhere else. I think that the Isaiah Bond injury is the one that, quite frankly, if this team doesn't get over the hump, if it loses somewhere along the line just short of a championship, I think they'll look back at the Bond injury and say that was one that crippled them, and that while they overcame it for the majority of the season against the very best teams that they've needed to play on their schedule. Primarily, you think about those Georgia games, what might have made the difference in Atlanta in an SEC championship game. I think you hate to just point towards one guy ever and say that in football that's a guy that could make a difference. But this team just hasn't been the same offensively without him. And I'm afraid that we'll get through the rest of the season and never quite see the Texas offense the way it was meant to be.
Well, that brings us right to the quarterback, because I've said a long time that if Quinn Ewers protects the football and plays his best football, Texas is largely unbeatable, whether Isaiah Bond is playing or not. Is there anything that you saw from him in the Clemson game, or even building up to the Clemson game, that tells you, because he played a fairly clean football game against Clemson, a very good team, very talented, blue chip ratio, etc., fought back. Did you see what you needed to see from him or is the scouting report just going to be what it is on Quinn Ewers?
I think the jury's still going to be out a little bit. He was really good last week, but the running game was really good as well. And when Sarkisian can, he will lean into the running game at the expense, I think, of trying to put too much on Quinn Ewers' shoulders. You could see that last week. The problem that Quinn's had since he's come back in October from the oblique injury is that he'll have usually one great quarter in every game, and then the passing game really struggles to be serviceable in the other quarters. And, it is a stretch of bad football that, when compared to his peers, is significantly worse in terms of volume of bad quarters, that the passing game just kind of lingers a little bit. You kind of saw it a week ago, last week against Clemson as well. The passing game shuts down after halftime. Now, that was a coaching decision. It wasn't like Quinn played poorly, but I would have liked to have seen him air it out a little bit more, just because it's been such a long time since we've seen Quinn Ewers look like an NFL quarterback, like the guy, that kind of the prince that was promised. We saw a little bit of that last week, not enough to say Quinn's back or to make a real declaration of intent. But I think the hope will be that he can build off of what he did a week ago, that he continues to play a clean game, because Texas with a B-, Quinn Ewers is a really tough team to beat. And when they've lost this season, it's been because he hasn't quite been able to hit those levels. It's not the Quinn Ewers peak that Texas needs to have better. His peaks
Yep.
are as good as anybody in the sport. They need his lows to not quite be his lows. If he, instead of being awful for a couple of quarters, he can just be, Texas might win the whole thing. Like it might be as simple as, can the worst of Quinn Ewers just be okay? And then I think everything else can take care of itself. But I mean, that is a theory that remains a little untested. In the biggest games, they need him to be better than he has been, or they won't beat an Ohio State or an Oregon or a Georgia in a third game. And really, for all of the Arizona State talk that we'll have about the game on New Year's Day, the reality is I think Texas sees itself playing in the game beyond this next one against Arizona State, and the season will largely be defined by what happens after that. It is what Texas asked for when the season started, that they get back to where they had been a year ago with a chance to make that right. And, you know, I don't know that this season can fully be deemed a success without, I think, getting past Arizona State and then handling one of either Ohio State and Oregon. And I think it will take Texas's fastball to do that. And I don't know that we've seen it. I don't know that there's a performance this year that you would see from Texas and go, if they replicate that against Georgia or Ohio State or Oregon, they'll win those games. I think the other teams on this that we would be talking about in this discussion have those kind of performances. You might even be able to point to Ohio State's performance against Oregon the first time they play and say, you know, if they just do that again, that'll beat most teams on most days. I think we're still waiting for that for Texas, and it feels like an ominous point given that the season ultimately will be defined in a couple of weeks, and we're still waiting for Texas to kind of give us a splashy performance.
I want to dissect sort of the matchup with Arizona State, but I tend to agree with you. I think they're going to be judged based on what they do following a game in which they are a 2-touchdown favorite. I'm going to go back, though, to last weekend. I'm curious. I lived in Austin when I was in middle school. I played at Hill Country Middle School, and I went to Westlake for a year. And I used to, run around with my buddies on the parking garage in the end zone there where it was covered with turf. I'm sure you remember that. There was like turf on top of the end zone, and kids, we used to run around. I have not been to a game. I used to go to a bunch of games at that time. My brother went to University of Texas, but I've not been to a game since then. That's mid-90s because I'm old. I'm curious, what was the crowd like? What was the building like from a playoff standpoint? Did it live up to what people were expecting? Obviously, it got a little tense there with only game in the first weekend that got to a single score in the fourth quarter, but they answered with the longest run of the season. Like, I'm just curious, this atmosphere coming up against Arizona State, I don't know what to expect. Tickets are very cheap. I mentioned you can get into the building for less than $40. What was it like at Darrell K last weekend?
I think, DKR has changed so much since I was a student in the mid to late 90s to its heyday under Mac Brown. They've really done a great job of improving the atmosphere. I thought the stadium last weekend, the crowd was really good. A little bit unique in that it's the middle of a day. It was a little bit of a flat atmosphere, I think, going into the game. And unlike maybe it felt like Notre Dame was on fire, Ohio State's prime time. So that's a little bit different. But I thought the crowd was really good. I think the challenging thing in these playoffs is that, it's expensive for a large group of people to go to everything. And Texas, I think, will experience that if they win the semifinal is in Jerry World in Dallas. And I think that there have been some Texas fans that are already having to make decisions on, well, if they play in Jerry World, I definitely want to be at that game. And then there's another trip to Atlanta potentially should you win that game. So I think that this is the game that if there is a game where there's going to be a cheap ticket where, I don't know how Arizona State's going to travel to this thing, but I think Texas fans are picking their poisons, and I think that they may have their eye on a couple of games beyond this. So I don't know. Like, I think that this, you see it sometimes in bowl games. I've been to Sugar Bowls in the past where you walk in and it's $5. It was, $200 on the day the tickets came out, and then it's $5 the night going in. You're probably going to get that for the Peach Bowl. I can't imagine that there's going to be a dynamic thirst for that game, but I kind of understand it. I mean, if I know Texas fans that will be at the game and they're going to try to make everything, but I also know Texas fans that believe that they'll be playing in Dallas in a couple of weeks. Yeah. And that if they've got to pick one or the other, they'll pick that game and then try to figure out Atlanta after that. If should Texas make it that far?
3 trips to Atlanta in a month and a half with another game in stadium and another game in the state. I mean, if this game is in Tempe or if this game is in Austin, it's a hard sellout, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that, and I think the other games will be okay. Like, I don't anticipate that the Rose Bowl will have any issues with Oregon and Ohio State. This is a bit of a tricky one where, there's no natural tie-in for Texas to be in Atlanta for the Peach Bowl, which I guess is part of, that's an SEC thing, which in the past.
It's why Georgia's in New Orleans. Yeah,
exactly. And because Texas isn't in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl, they're at the Peach Bowl, not an association they've ever been in. It's kind of cool, though. I didn't know this until a couple days ago, but Texas will have an opportunity to be the first team to win all of the major bowl games, the Peach Bowl being one that they haven't won and haven't been in. But should they accomplish that, whatever that's worth, yay for Texas. But yeah, I think that, I think the unique thing about this game against Arizona State is that it's a hell of a thing. These teams haven't been in these situations before where you come in to a playoff game as a heavy favorite. What does that mean? What does it mean to be at a neutral site? I know Texas has played its best football neutral site and on the road. And that really came out of nowhere. They were a really poor road team under Steve Sarkisian the first year and a half that he was the coach. They played a game against Oklahoma State where it just fell apart on them. Quinn Ewers had an awful game. They blew a big second half lead. And from that moment on, they haven't lost on the road going back to the 2022 season. That includes Michigan. That includes Alabama. That includes going to a place like Manhattan, Kansas. They've been really good on the road. Obviously, they play neutral site games. I think they probably are more comfortable on the road. And I don't know how that happens because more times than not, I think teams want to play at home. But the best version of Texas has been a team that goes on the road. So, in talking to people this week, Texas feels like a confident team. This is a team that believes they're right where they're supposed to be. They think this thing is lined up for them perfectly to accomplish ultimately what was the bigger goal. And I think, what would have been really unique, and we'll see it tested with Oregon, God forbid they lose to Ohio State in the round of 8 and go number 1 and win your conference championship and then come up that short for a national championship we've not seen before. Texas, this would be a disaster. And the thing coming into the year more than the SEC championship was to get deep into the playoffs, succeed, win a semifinal, get to a final, maybe win a national championship. That's where the eyes have been for Texas fans all year long, with all due respect to an SEC championship, which they've never played for before. But they could have won that game against Georgia, and it would not have mattered come January 1st. That should they have lost that game, I think the season as a whole would have been viewed as a major disappointment. And I think that's a pressure we haven't seen teams play with before. And I think, Ohio State and Oregon both have to play with some unique pressure in that game, and that the loser of that game that will be a bad year. And it's, we wonder, would Ryan Day lose his job if he finishes in the round of 8? How do you compartmentalize going undefeated and winning the Big Ten in year 1, but then going out in the round of 8 if you're Oregon? So I think what's really interesting about this round of the playoffs is that there are some teams that will lose this weekend and will feel like they accomplished what they could have accomplished. I think Arizona State, Boise State, probably among those teams. Let Penn State mess around and find out. Let Texas mess around this week and become the new poster boy for not winning in the playoffs when you're supposed to. I think it's a brand new stigma that we've not seen carried out. But once we do, it will be the thing that teams around the sport are known for. You either win in December or you don't. And I think it's kind of interesting that this is the first chance for us to see what that pressure feels like. Texas thinks it'll be okay, but get into the fourth quarter and let that be a 1-score game and everything that's on the line be on the line. And I think we would see a Texas team tested in a way that we haven't so far this season.
Well, I mean, I think you get to the Final Four and you get to the SEC championship game, double-digit wins, And oh, by the way, you go into College Station, you sort of punk your rival like in that fashion where you just physically dominate them. I think most people will be okay, but college football fans are crazy. I get it.
Before this season started, I did a poll, and more than 86% said this season would be a failure if Texas didn't make it to at least a national semifinal. So
there you go.
Texas fans doing what they do, just a taste, a morsel of success. And it's like, well, if we don't get to a national semifinal or a final, this season was a dud.
So let's talk. I want to get into the matchup here because what I thought was interesting about Clemson's ability to come back is a quarterback playing the best football of his life, very high-level player with 3 really talented receivers and a really good tight end attacking down the field, outside the hashes, between. I mean, they were playing as well as they've played in that facet of the game all season. Clemson throwing the football. That is how you have to sort of stay in a game, in my opinion, with Texas, especially if they're going to run the ball for 300 yards. Arizona State was the best rushing defense in the Big 12, but that's not even a top 25 unit nationally. They've got a couple of nice pieces. They got a really great corner. They got some good stuff on defense, but the offense is really interesting with a big thumper of a running back in Skattebo, who's a cult hero. You got a really good quarterback in Sam Levitt, who's better than people think. Really nice tight end, but you don't have your star receiver. Stylistically, does this type of game where they're okay playing a lower scoring game, wanting to play a little dirtier game, wanting to be physical, control the clock, is that a worse matchup for Texas, or is that a better matchup for Texas than a team like Clemson that clearly wanted to throw it all over the place?
It's that Clemson threw it so well all over the place against that secondary that stood out. They were efficient in ways. They went into that game, and Cade Klubnik mentions that Texas wants you to go the length of the field. They want you to go 8 plays, 9 plays, 10 plays. And he felt like that's playing Texas's style of football, and that's not what we, Clemson, want to do in the game. They wanted to be the big play offense, which they'd been most of the season. He was so good in that game. The Texas players on the defensive side of the ball feel like they were in a real skirmish over the weekend, that, they got a really good quarterback on a really good day. And while that guy made some plays, and I think there's a lot of respect in the Texas locker room for Cade Klubnik and those Clemson receivers, I think they felt like we always kept them at arm's distance. Even when they cut the lead to 7 in the fourth, you go up 14 again 2 plays later. But I think they felt like, you know what? He landed some blows on us. They landed some punches, and we were okay with it. I think they feel like they survived. And I think more than anything, and I didn't think about this until really after it happened, that game with Cade Klubnik prepares them for an Oregon or an Ohio State in a way that no other game on the schedule has. So I think they feel like they're better. I don't think they feel like they'll play anybody that will play better than Cade Klubnik or those receivers did. And if they do, well, then they face that, and they know that they can at least survive someone's. They didn't survive Michael Penix a year ago. That caliber of quarterback playing that well was too much for them to overcome. There was actually a lot more optimism coming out of Austin from the weekend about that performance than you might have thought. But the offense, I think, had a pick-me-up game. I think the defense felt like, okay, well, we saw something that we haven't seen before. I think they felt like there was more good from that than bad, although I think a neutral would have watched that game and thought, damn, Cade Klubnik was slinging the ball all over the field. Is that what it looks like when he plays every week?
No.
It's not. But as someone who's been a Cade Klubnik truther since he was a very young player, that's what it's supposed to look like when the light switch goes on. And I think Texas felt like, I think it's easy to be magnanimous when you win. And I think Texas won. I think they feel like they won comfortable enough that they were able to then tip their cap to Klubnik and Clemson and say, you guys were really good. Thanks for the challenge. It's a good thing they'll have it, though, because they will play somebody presumably in the round of 4 in either Oregon or Ohio State that can pressure Texas defensively in ways that Texas otherwise hasn't this season. I have real doubts about whether Arizona State will pressure. I think it's going to take a quarterback that's at least in the Klubnik zip code in terms of you're going to have to make some tough throws against this secondary. I didn't think that they played poorly last week as much as Cade Klubnik made some NFL throws. He had some guys make some NFL catches, and they did it against NFL players. Malik Muhammad got picked on a little bit in that game, but it was like all season long, there hasn't been a player on this defense that's been picked on ever. So it will be interesting to see if a Levitt or a Howard or a Gabriel, if they feel like they can watch and pick something out of that Clemson game. I can go, okay, well, look, we're not going to go after Jahdae Barron. Maybe that's the apple you don't want to take a bite out of. But if you got to bite out of one, maybe you go after number 5, Malik Muhammad. That's what they did on Saturday with Clemson. They had a lot of success. And I think everybody who observes Texas is wondering now as we go into the season, will that be the new thing that teams try to do? It was kind of a one-off, at least at this point in the season. Clemson made it work, but we've not seen anybody else even try it. It does make, I think, what Arizona State has to do in this game. There's a blueprint for, I think, what has to happen. Can Levitt do what Klubnik did, which, I don't know that Cade Klubnik will play a better game next season for NFL scouts. He was so good. The throws he made were so on the money and in difficult spots to make.
The smash route to the tight end down the right sideline is like there's like nobody on the planet that makes that throw consistently.
No, and to do it in a game when against a good team, as a Cade Klubnik truther and a guy who, when they were in high school, said I thought he was better than Quinn Ewers as a prospect. It was kind of good to see him play well, but do it not beat the team that you cover, because
right.
Then there would have been a whole lot of weird backlash to that. In the end, like I said, it's easy to be magnanimous with you when you win, and I think Texas wants to do that against Arizona State. I think when it's over with, they want to go, you know what? You guys were okay. You guys really competitive. Thank you for
pat him on the head
a little bit, yeah. But I mean, this won't be a successful weekend for Texas if it's not a little patronizing. They got the good end of the bracket. There's just no other way to get around it. They are playing the team in Arizona State that if you could draft 1 through 8, everybody would try to take Arizona State as the team that they would play in this spot. Although Boise State,
I would play Boise. I would play.
Penn State may turn around and disprove that theory, but it would be one of those two teams. And you're away from Georgia. If you're Texas, it's like let somebody else slay that dragon. If we can get to the final and they're not there, fine. I think Texas got they have to play the extra game.
Yep.
But the path to the semifinals is about as yellow brick road as it gets. And you'll get that game in Dallas. It'll be, essentially what the SEC championship game was for Texas and going to play in Atlanta to make either Ohio State or Oregon go to Dallas to play that game would be a tremendous, turn of events for Texas. And they missed a chance last year to play for the national championship in Houston. It was right there in front of them to take. It's not quite the same thing, but to be able to play in Dallas in the semifinals and then go to Atlanta, which at that point would be a home away from home. At least they would have won one to get there at some point. I think Texas fans are rightfully optimistic, but it will hit hard if they don't have the success that they've been putting in their brains all year long. It's just destined to happen. And it's like, well, maybe, but maybe Oregon and Ohio State are really good too. And it kind of feels like those 3 teams, whichever one of those 3 teams comes out of that little cluster, feels like that should be the team that wins the national championship, primarily because I just can't see Georgia winning it with a quarterback situation that they now have.
I mean, once Carson Beck had the surgery, my top 3 teams in the country are those 3 teams. Like, those are the best 3 teams. And so
I don't know that I'm going to take anybody to beat Georgia beforehand, because I would really need to see Notre Dame and Penn State do that, because that feels the very Penn State and Notre Dame thing to do, to go slap Georgia around. But God, if you can't do it now when they've got one arm tied behind their back. So, I think Texas feels like they've got an unofficial bye week. I mean, they expect to beat Arizona State by double digits. If they don't, it was a bad performance. And then the season will come down to, will they be ready for a Dylan Gabriel and or a Will Howard? And as somebody that watches this team, on a day-by-day basis, like I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Cade Klubnik maybe gave them that challenge to get them ready for that, or maybe not.
Ohio State's damn good, man. They're damn good.
And here's the thing. I want to ask you this question, and I've asked it all week long. Should Texas be rooting for one of these two teams over the other?
So that's a really good question. I think Oregon is probably the better matchup for Texas, but I don't love saying that. I really just think you're going to have to get a really good performance out of Ewers. You're going to have to run the football. You're going to have to play sound defense. It's all the same stuff, Geoff. You know this stuff.
Isn't Ohio State's apex higher, though?
I think so. Yes. I think it's the same stuff. You got to win the turnover battle. You got to protect the quarterback. You got to win on third downs. You got to finish drives in the red zone, which something Texas has had trouble with. Like, they've got to do all that stuff to beat either of them. I think you have to play an A+ game to beat Ohio State. I think you could play an A- game and beat Oregon. I think, but I don't.
I've had a bunch of Arizona people say, "Hey, what can Arizona State do that Georgia was able to do?" And it was like, well,
stop the run.
10 legit NFL defensive linemen just as a starters like that. It helps. Georgia was able to physically manhandle Texas up front in ways that Texas A&M couldn't, and Clemson couldn't, and Florida couldn't, and Oklahoma couldn't. They faced really good defenses, but there's only one Georgia that's been able to completely make Texas look like they don't necessarily, at least one side of the ball doesn't belong on the field.
And I want to say this with as much respect about Oregon as possible. I think Ohio State's better at that.
Yeah,
that's
it. They could for one night, they can be Georgia at Georgia's best, and I think that's probably the way you answer that question if you're Texas. But, Oregon might be the best team in the country, and we might be disrespecting them by positioning those two teams the way that we have. But I'm with you. And I think most people, there's a very fine line saying, what should we do in this game? Who do you root for? And I think very begrudgingly, Texas is rooting and wishing for Oregon, knowing that Dylan Gabriel did what Dylan Gabriel did last year in that game against Oklahoma. So Texas fans are very carefully requesting a dance with the devil that did them in October a year ago.
Just go score more points than Arizona State first, and then we can talk about that later, at least like a couple of hours later.
Hey, man, I'm not even – you won't find me if they lose to Arizona State. I will take the month off. I do not want that smoke. They need to just handle that business, and then we'll see what they're made out of after that.
Where can everybody find you, follow you, read your stuff, orangebloods.com? Give everybody a good promotion here. While I tell everybody, go to ML Rose in Nashville. Where should people find your work?
Just go to orangebloods.com, texas.rivals.com. You can find us on YouTube, Orange Bloods Live. Free content on the video side throughout the week, nonstop, Monday through Sunday, basically. And, of course, we've been number one in the Rivals Network for 20-plus years. Yeah, we do good work. If you like University of Texas football coverage, the number one message board really in the industry, it's kind of what we're known for, much to my chagrin. Go check it out. We're there for you. We'll give you a free trial. You can go. If we can't win you over in a week or a month or something like that, then we didn't deserve your business anyway.
There you go. Free trial. There you go. Thank you, Geoff, for hanging out. Of course, everybody check out ML Rose. If you're watching on YouTube, thumbs up, notifications. You guys know the whole deal. But ML Rose Burgers and Beers in Nashville, 6 great locations. We do appreciate it. Geoff, Happy New Year, my guy. Pleasure talking with you, and we will talk to you guys next time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. There you go. Thanks, Geoff. Appreciate you, man.
You got it.